Well, on behalf of the San Diego North EDC, I'd like to welcome you again to one of our webinar series for COVID-19 response here in North County. San Diego North EDC has been around for just about 30 years. We're the only economic development organization that works exclusively north of Highway 56 in San Diego County, where we work to promote the region for inward investment, try and solve issues for existing employers, and connect businesses and educators to strengthen our workforce pipeline. We are excited today to be joined by two of our investor companies, Nordson and Hunter Industries, and I'll introduce our speakers here in a moment. But we thought it was going to be important to bring a presentation together about reopening safely under COVID-19 restrictions and really to approach that issue as a strategic one. We know that there are a lot of information that's out there from the county, from the state, from various entities talking about some of the nuts and bolts of safety protocols. But what we wanted to do was ratchet the conversation up a little bit to a higher level so that you could take advantage of really how how to think through and approach this challenge at a strategic level for your own enterprise, since we're all quite different and unique. So we have two speakers today. We're going to start with Ray McHenry. He is in global business human resources for Nordson, and Ray will tell us a little bit about Nordson and give us the 2-minute elevator speech about that great North County company here in Carlsbad. And then Scotty Lombardi, who is the Senior Manager for Global Talent Management at Hunter Industries here in San Marcos, or there in San Marcos. And Scotty will walk us through what Hunter is doing on this framework. We'll take questions probably by raising hands, since we have a workable number, as well as in chat. Each speaker is going to give us 5 to 10 minutes, and then again, we'll open it up to questions with our goal to finish up by about 11. And so with that, Ray, the floor is yours, and tell us a little bit about Nordson and the COVID-19 response.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. It's good to see some of you, at least on the video chat here. Again, my name is Ray McHenry. I'm the Global Business HR Partner for a division of the Nordson Corporation. And Nordson is actually based out of Cleveland, Ohio. We're a company's been around since the early 50s. We're actually traded on the NASDAQ. We're about a little over a $2 billion company. We're a very global company. We have about 7,500 employees worldwide, and we have sales, service, and manufacturing around the world. We primarily are involved in the dispensing of materials of some sort, whether it's glues, adhesives, solder paste, whatever it might be that you would lay down some sort of material. Our equipment probably does that. The division that I work in is considered advanced tech. So the products that we are dealing with primarily work with printed circuit boards, solder paste, computer chip manufacturing, and things along those lines. So the division that I support has about 1,200 employees worldwide, globally, from an HR perspective. And then in North County, we've got about 500 employees located in our Carlsbad and Vista facilities. So I gave you just kind of a quick overview. And we're very manufacturing, so most of the manufacturing for the products I support are actually manufactured in Carlsbad. So we do have quite a big presence from a manufacturing perspective. So I'll leave it at that. If you want to shift it over to Scott.
Yeah, Scotty, do you want to tell us a little bit about Hunter, and then we'll kind of get it back to Ray for kind of going through some of our questions.
Of course, yes. Good morning. I hope everyone had a nice weekend, and thanks for joining us today. So my name is Scotty Lombardi. I am the Senior Manager of Global Talent Management here at Hunter Industries, also a board member at San Diego North EDC. So excited to represent both organizations this morning. Hunter is a 40-year-old company headquartered here in San Marcos. We have 3,000 employees across the globe, spanning 20 countries. Our domestic manufacturing facilities are here in San Marcos, up in Los Angeles, out in Orlando, and then we have factories in Tijuana as well. Our primary business is that of irrigation for residential, commercial, golf, and agriculture. We have a few other business lines up in LA. We do dispensing technologies that make rolled towel dispensers, soap dispensers, hand sanitizer dispensers. So that has been has seen a big uptick in business through this pandemic. Our ag irrigation is manufactured here in San Marcos, also out in Orlando. And then we have landscape lighting as well. We do custom manufacturing at our facilities in San Marcos and in Mexico as well. So we have a variety of customers who we're supporting with plastic injection molding, primarily in the healthcare space, also in aerospace. A little bit about us.
Well, thank you, Ray and Scotty. So I put some questions together kind of to help guide our discussion. Again, if there are things that people are interested in, feel free to put them in chat. And so let me start with Ray, and then we'll go kind of, we'll alternate or however. But Ray and Scotty, let's kind of lean into this first question. We've all been asked, I think, over the past 3 months to suddenly become public health experts, or at least versed in it, which is different than our day jobs. So as we've learned more about COVID and as well as public health directives that are trying to make that, as organizations, how have you tried to stand up the ability to digest, assimilate, and then implement the various health orders and guidance and directives that have been coming down at your organizations, since so often these have been changing or at least shifting over time? How have you really tried to stand up the team to be able to take that new information in and then put it into practice as you've supported hundreds, if not thousands, of employees? Ray, how have you done that at Nordson, both globally and locally?
Well, I would say, let me start kind of locally a little bit here. So I do try to stay up to date as much as I possibly can on what's going on from COVID. So the sites and areas that I go to, Cal Chamber has a tremendous amount of really good information. So if you haven't been out to the Cal Chamber site, I highly recommend it. They do provide updates on COVID and what's the latest and greatest information you need to know, as well as the California Department of Public Health also does a great job of posting the most recent orders and giving you some overview as to what is required. Because to your point, I mean, we've got state requirements, and then of course the County of San Diego comes out with their own specific requirements as well. So we need to kind of stay on top of that as much as possible. So partly what we also, and then we also have a legal department as part of our corporation that also provides us regular updates. So we actually have met and continue to meet on a weekly basis to review exactly what those orders are and how do they actually impact our business. And for example, it's probably most of you realize this, but there just recently came out the San Diego County required that essential businesses now, which we've been, now needs to do temperature testing, right? Which is something that we had not put into place yet. So now all of a sudden we're like, okay, how do we implement this? What's the process of doing temperature testing? And how are we going to do that in a way that complies with California law, right? So such as, hey, you've got to make sure people are paid while they're actually getting their temperature taken, right? Because you don't want to do it and have people queued up and they're not paying them, because that would then be, against California law, right? So we had to go through that whole, process of saying, how do we implement this? How we do it effectively due to the county's requirements, and then also make sure we comply with California state labor laws to make sure we pay people appropriately. And then also you got to deal with HIPAA laws, which is protection of people's private information and so forth. So what do you do with that information? How do you track it? What do you do with it? And all that type of thing. So it's been a challenge. I mean, it truly has, because it does change literally daily. And a lot of times the government just says, starting tonight at midnight, effective, this is what you need to do, and you got to put it in place. So it is regular communication and then working with our local teams to make sure we've got it covered.
And so
that's primarily how we've been dealing with it.
And Ray, it sounds like that, not, clearly within your sweet spot of using, of having HR and legal function together as a coordinated team. But if you had to bring in ops and manufacturing and some of sort of your factory leads also think about how, again, if you were going to be doing that, how you would implement it in a way that would allow those entities to kind of continue to operate? Has it been really a cross-functional team that's been stood up?
Yeah, no, it's cross-functional and it's cross-business and it's cross-region. And really for us, that's because we're a global company, everything is different by location, by the business you're in, the type of business you're in, right? So I mean, it takes a lot of coordination, and it's a lot of time spent really understanding what we can and can't do, for sure.
Scotty, over at Hunter, how have you guys tried to? You're again a little bit more. Well, you're headquartered here in San Diego County. So how have you tried to think about how to take all that information in and try and not get paralyzed by overanalysis, but really try to put it into practice as you need to do it on a daily basis to make those pivots?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were doing at the beginning of all of this, Eric. So we put together a cross-functional team, a task force, if you will, and we were meeting 9 a.m. every single day of the week and talking through what was the latest news or the latest updates. And again, it was really relying on credible sources, World Health Org, CDC, county, state, and not paying much attention to what was happening in the hyped up media. And so we were, meeting every day. We were coming up with plans to respond to the new orders. We were coming up with plans to circumvent any of the challenges we were facing with supply chain management, with being able to run non-essential or essential product lines, depending on which country we were in. And then, it did get to a point where that task force was able to start meeting just twice a week because there wasn't the urgency or the amount of changes happening as we first saw. We're now meeting once a week because much of what we've put into place has been established now for a few weeks. And we've actually pivoted, and I won't get into too much detail right now. Maybe we can talk about this in a little bit. Working over the last 3 weeks with our return to workplace plan. We're not planning on implementing that immediately and not for the next several weeks, but we have a plan, a guidebook that we will use to implement. With regards to manufacturing, we are in an advanced manufacturing operation. So I know you've been here, Eric, and much of what we're doing is put together by robots. So we don't have folks sitting in close proximity to each other, assembling things manually. So we do already naturally have people pretty spread out. They're roaming for machines to make sure those machines are up and running as they should be. We, of course, provided everybody with all of the necessary PPE. We locked down the facilities. We've done all of that. With regards to the county order, we were a bit ahead of the reopening order, which says that companies need to take temperatures when folks return to work or make observations. So that temp checking is not a requirement. It's an and/or situation. But we actually brought on RNs, registered nurses, for each of our sites in mid-March at the beginning of all of this so that they could be monitoring for symptoms. We had them situated in rooms where employees could go seek guidance or maybe be checked if they weren't feeling well. And that has continued and it's been received very well. So those are some of the things that we're doing and how we stay informed.
That's great. Thanks, guys. If I do that, that's only because I'm unmuting to try and be good, so no cross noise. How did you guys, Scotty, I think you touched on it a little bit in terms of that as an advanced manufacturer, you have a lot of your processes currently in your manufacturing operations were automated, so simply sort of a function of that. But Ray or Scotty, maybe you want to talk about it. Did you try and go through and really sort of bring in operations and try and go step by step, machine by machine, floor area by floor area to really understand close proximity? How did you guys try and sort of think through? And then did you identify places in your processes and operations where social distancing was going to be difficult? And did you require leads to sort of think through and rethink how those processes were going to take place? Ray, maybe start with you. How do you guys kind of try and do on some of the nuts and bolts with the ops side?
Yeah, so we did several different things. So to your point, we are a manufacturing facility that fairly well spread out. So the 6-foot distancing aspect was not so critical, but there was still individuals that had to get within 6 feet of each other for whatever reason, throughout the day. So what we did do and what we implemented is a contact tracing process, right? So that every employee that worked on the floor was up to their responsibility. If they dealt with anybody within a 15 minutes, they had to keep track of that person. Just the event of that, if we ever had somebody come back positive, we could go back and very quickly identify who were those individuals that they were in contact with that we would need to then let them know, right, that there's a potential case there. And that actually did come up a couple of times. So we actually have had a couple of COVID positive cases in our facility. They were diagnosed, they were not tested, so we had to go by doctor's recommendations. But it was very easy for us to go back to the individuals that those folks had been near that day that they had come back positive and said, look, you should be aware that this person has been positive and that you should double check yourself, make sure you don't have any symptoms and that type of thing. So that was the key one that we had that we implemented. The other thing we've also done is because of our lunchrooms or places where people go for their meals was a little too small for everybody to be able to stay in there and be away from each other. We expanded conference rooms that were normally used just for conferences or meetings are now expanded to lunchrooms, so we were able to move people away from each other. So that was also critical for us. Now we've also made it mandatory that they need to wear masks within our facility. So that was also necessary to help make sure we didn't cross issues with people contaminating themselves or whatever. So those are the main things that we've done, but the contact tracing aspect I think was probably the key. And it did, like I said, save us in a situation where we did have somebody come positive. It was very easy for us to go back and say, who was that person in contact on the day that they became positive.
Great, thank you. Scotty,
Yep.
anything, do you want to add anything that you've done in terms of, auditing your operational processes to try and identify places where there either would be choke points that you needed to re-engineer or places where you really needed to, put some extra effort in to think about keeping people apart?
Yeah, so early on with facilities operations and risk management, really walking through where we still had employees on site and auditing for compliance, but also auditing for employee safety, and then making the necessary adjustments. So, putting in plexi in between people, if people were going to be close together, adding time clocks, setting up disinfection and sanitation stations. We have a deep cleaning, disinfection that happens 3 times a week when employees aren't around. We've hired additional janitorial staff who are, going around and wiping down commonly touched surfaces with disinfectant. And then we've also staggered shifts. So, we're a 3-shift round-the-clock organization. Generally, when there's not a pandemic, everybody arrives on the same time, leaves on the same time. We've altered that so that we have, fewer folks here throughout the day at the same time. We have fewer people taking their meal periods at the same time. We have a lot of outdoor space. We have a 7-acre park, so we've leveraged that for meal periods too, and adding tables out there. I think that is just about what we've been doing. Now what's happening too is phase 3 of our return to workplace plan. Last week, I tasked the facilities team and our risk management department to walk through all of our unoccupied buildings, because we have 12 of them here on this 20-acre campus, and they've been sitting vacant. So they were tasked with walking through and seeing how well or not workspaces are configured to maintain physical distancing, so that when we get the all clear and we start phasing people back in, we have those spaces available for them, following much of the same protocols that were implemented for our manufacturing floor employees.
So Scotty, I'll stay with you, and you just mentioned that, right? So that you've had your operations and your manufacturing kind of continue to operate. You've been an important part of the supply chain for such as an essential business. But sounds like a lot of your white collar or admin or what have you, some of the folks that aren't engaged have been remote working. Let's sort of talk about on the HR side. How has that been going? I mean, how did you sort of have to lean into human resources, and how are you going to manage those people to make sure they stayed productive, stayed engaged? Because I know that corporate culture, like all of us, is so important, but it's so important to Hunter. how have you had to sort of think about, again, managing all those white collar workers that were working now from their badly lit home offices?
Yeah. And it happened without any notice. So there was no planning. It was basically grab your stuff and go. And I think we all left here as quickly as we did, thinking it was going to be a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Hunter has a very rich company culture, and much of that culture is the camaraderie that is built up and built by in-person relationships, but working, within our infrastructure. Working from home is not something we've ever supported as an organization, and arguments could be made for both sides of that. So when you deploy 400 people to work from home, it required a lot of lifting from our IT support or IT to support that lift. From a people perspective, though, it was making sure people were taken care of, making sure people knew that, yes, we know that you are now working from home. We know that you are now teachers. We know that you are now daycare providers. And so we set that expectation early on, like, we don't expect 100% from you right now. We want you to be good parents. We want you to be good teachers. And we want you to give us as much as you possibly can. But we certainly realize that if you need to, work a little fewer hours here or there, or work odd hours, or have a crying baby on your lap in a conference call, that's going to be A-okay with us.
Ray, how about you? How have you sort of tried to manage? I mean, Nordson already has experience of dealing with many sites around the world, and of course, a headquarters that is not even in your same time zone, much less your same city. But how have you guys tried to deal with the fact that you've had a lot of your employees who are working remotely?
Right, similar to what Scotty was saying, it was a major aspect from our IT group because we have a lot of engineers that had to take home their workstations literally. I mean, a laptop wouldn't have been sufficient. They needed their whole desktop and workstation to do their job effectively. So there's a fair amount of work very quickly to have to put that together. And what's been interesting is, we go back and ask some folks, and to your point, we haven't necessarily been working from home on a regular basis, but a lot of folks have actually become more productive. I mean, they actually are saying, you know what, I get more done working from home. And so I think in some of those cases, this may be the new reality for a lot of folks, that we're not going to require them to come in as often. So that's also been very effective for us too, realizing that working from home is not necessarily a bad thing. In some ways it's good. To your point though, we actually have had managers, do their virtual coffee breaks. They'll do their virtual happy hours with their team, so they do the things that are fun and away from work to make sure they stay connected. Because that's truly one of our biggest concerns. How do you stay engaged? How do you get your employees to feel like they're still part of a team even though they're remote? So we really encouraged our managers to do that. And there are some other things from an HR perspective you do have to take into consideration, which is if you have non-exempt employees work from home, how do you manage their time effectively so they get paid appropriately, right? And there's also the questions come up with, hey, I'm using my personal internet, I'm maybe using my personal cell phone. Hey, do I get reimbursed for some of that cost, now that I work from home? Yeah, the answer is yeah, you should be getting some of that, reimbursed. So we had to implement some programs and policies that were not necessarily in place before, but we had to figure out how to do these aspects as we kind of work more from home, right? So yeah, it's been a challenge, and even doing more of a video chat versus just a sort of flat Skype meeting can also have a big plus on improving that connection with the folks that you're working with.
Scotty, I know, again, just to stay on the subject for a little bit, as you sort of mentioned, I mean, it is something that Hunter is known for in terms of building that kind of family and team perspective among your team members. Anything that you want to share that you've specifically implemented to try and keep people engaged and feeling part of the Hunter family when they haven't seen each other face to face for 60 days or 90 days at this point?
Yeah, I have a dedicated organizational engagement person who's responsible for anything from, of course, the surveys that we do, but also employee activities. And, survey was in January and there are no activities. And so this person, in collaboration with the organizational development team, their names are Jordan, Markela, and Anthony. Their first initials together are JAM. And so they've creatively come up with rebranding themselves as Jam, as in we're in this jam together. They're sending out weekly content that's relatable to all employees, but also they've developed a Jam leadership webinar series. So once a week, we are offering some kind of learning, virtually, of course, that's focused on effective communication during these times, or how to engage your employees, or how to recognize from a distance. They've really impressed me in that regard. So we are doing that. We have a pretty manual and in-person recognition program organizationally that only works when you're able to meet in person. So they've come up with ways to pivot to being able to see that continuously remotely. And then we're doing some Q&A videos with Greg, our CEO, so that our people are hearing from him as often as we can possibly get him to do that, and sending out communication when we have some kind of updates to share with the organization as well.
Great, perfect. All right, so let's kind of let's pivot a little bit. We'll get back to HR issues or HR-centric issues in a minute here. So one of the challenges that I think all businesses have really faced, and I'd be interested in sort of seeing how you guys leaned into this, has been PPE supply chains and how you sort of thought that. Were you able to build that procurement area into your existing supply chain? Did you have to stand up a new supply chain effort to get the PPE that you needed at your business? And any lessons learned or hurdles overcome that you think might be useful to the group for thinking about their own challenges for sourcing that for their businesses? Ray, clearly you guys have some clean room efforts and so forth, so you had some of that, but tell us a little bit about PPE and Nordson.
Well, we were fortunate at the very beginning because we could not source PPE stuff locally. It just was not available. And at that point, we were thinking we wanted the N95 masks was kind of the standard before that became an issue for hospitals and so forth, that they needed that more so than manufacturing. So we actually have facilities in China, and they were actually able to obtain N95 masks for us, and they sent it to us. So we actually had our own supply. Once we realized that that was really better served for the first responders, we said we don't want those anymore for our facilities. We gave those to the first responders, and then we went to the cloth mask aspect. And I'll tell you, the first go around with those was not good. I mean, the masks we got were not very well made. They didn't last very long. They're pretty uncomfortable. And so we had to resource and get another one. Now, I didn't personally get involved in that, so I don't know the name of the company, but I know that our supply chain did have to go out, and I think they ordered something like 10,000 masks. So they wanted at least one to two per individual. So they had to get large quantities. So it was definitely a challenge. We're now have them in place right now. I don't know. I don't have a recommendation. Maybe Scotty has one that they use, but you definitely need to go out and source to get good quality masks, because if you want to reuse them, you got to pay the money to get the right quality.
Again, before we get to Scotty's answer, I just want to remind people, if you want to put questions, it's in chat. That's a great way to do it. We will also sort of see if people want to raise their hands and do it, so we don't kind of have everybody talking at the same time with their line unmuted. Scotty, for you guys, you're obviously sourcing plastics and injected molding kinds of supplies on a daily basis, and you've built a whole supply chain around that. Do you find challenges in terms of doing any pivoting into this new world of needing to source masks and personal equipment, handheld thermometers, all that stuff, and anything that you've learned in that experience that can be useful to folks?
Yeah, similar experience to Nordson. No one could find the disposable masks when all of this first started coming out. We weren't looking for N95s. We were looking for, the standard issue, disposable at the time. And we actually had some of our suppliers reach out to us from other countries and say, hey, we can get these to you. And so that is the route we went, to get tens of thousands of them in order for every employee to have a new one, at least one new one every day, and then disposing of those, of course, sometimes depending on if they needed to switch it, we had extra. Just last week, though, we did buy about 5,000 reusable cloth masks that we can give to all of our employees. So those have arrived, and we are now making those available.
Great.
With regards to the no-touch thermometers, Eric and I had an offline conversation about this when the county was looking at what to do with the reopening orders for employers. And those were very scarce. I don't even know that they are readily available today. So one of the things we did was we built that into our nurse hiring model. And in order to be a qualified candidate for the on-site nurses, you had to have a no-touch thermometer in possession.
That's a great suggestion, Scotty. That's very interesting as people have sort of tried to face in and look at that. So let's talk a little bit about, and then we'll get to a couple broader points, but childcare, right? So, we know that many North County families, a lot of North County families, both parents work and school and camps and daycare are an important part of the support network. Scotty, what have you guys tried to do, or anything that you sort of built in to try? And you said, obviously, for your at-home folks, you've recognized that they need to have these other roles and requirements that are going to pull them away. But on your manufacturing front, I mean, clearly those people also can be are being impacted. What have you tried to do on the childcare and recognizing working families?
Yeah, so again, taking a very flexible approach with the folks who are on site, as with those who are working from home right now. A variety of things, taking additional time off either with or without pay, allowing folks to go into a negative pay time off accrual if that's necessary, supporting them with leaves that have actualized as a result of the pandemic, allowing people to change shifts. So maybe if they're a normal first shift employee who come in, 6 to 3, or if they want to come in on second shift because the spouse is working first, and that way, or there's some balance and childcare at home, we are willing to address those needs on a one-by-one basis. And again, it's all about being flexible, because for us, it's a company that prioritizes people over the processes and or profit. So we want people to be successful as family members first, and we're going to support them however we need to.
Great. Ray, I know we chatted a little bit before folks joined us, but anything that you guys have specifically done to try and lean into that issue with your workforce?
Yeah, so a couple of things we've done there, similar to what Scott just mentioned. We've allowed employees to take advance on their PTO between now and through the end of the year. So they can go as far negative as what they would earn between now and then. And then we also added an additional 80 hours of what we call COVID emergency leave in addition to their PTO. And they can use this for any purpose, of which daycare would be one. And they could do it in hourly increments or days or whatever they needed to. But it would be additional time off to take care of their children. And then also similar, we would allow at least our production folks, because we have multiple shifts, 2 shifts, if they wanted to switch shifts to alternate to help them offset their issue with daycare timing, we'd allow them to do that as well.
So this has been one of those, we'll probably, see it in Harvard Business School. There'll be case studies written about crisis management and dealing with the unexpected for organizations. So I think what I'd like to do before we open it up for any questions is kind of have you back, sort of reflect and think about, okay, what have we learned about this from an organizational standpoint that might help us for a whole variety of other business challenges? Hopefully we don't have another global pandemic in our lifetimes. But Scotty, as you sort of thought about it, and you're starting to reflect about it, as you've learned from this, are there lessons that you've thought of that are applicable to other things that Hunter either needs to do or might want to do in the future for thinking about organizational change?
Yeah, I think, the biggest pain points for us have been making sure that, we are prepared for something like this from an IT infrastructure perspective, even the hardware. I mean, the amount of employees who have PCs who are connected to a cubicle and being able to come up with laptops or loaner laptops is just one example of that. not a lot of painful learning moments. It will be interesting to see what the new normal is when we do return, because I do think some of these practices will continue. I have just been so impressed by our manufacturing operations team in a variety of ways. I mean, in one country, where we are deemed, where a product line may not be deemed essential, but in order wanting to keep those customers happy, they were able to take advantage of unoccupied buildings in San Marcos, move product lines very quickly from Tijuana to San Marcos in order to see that production going through. So that was very fascinating. And the same thing in Mexico. The government there was very strict with whether or not you could be up and running, and if you were up and running, this is what there was a deep checklist as to what you were going to be doing. And we were preparing, and we were about to go on a mock audit. They showed up before that could happen. They came through the facility. They said we were the best organization within the northern region that they had visited. They were very pleased with what they saw. And so I think from an operations, from a people in the plant perspective, I think we're doing things right. I think it's being able to work more quickly and with more agility with folks who are generally tethered to offices and cubicles in the event something like this happens again.
Ray, from Nordson's perspective, anything you sort of think about, that's been useful to have a lesson that you've learned that might be applicable to another business challenge, or things that you've learned about your organization that you're thinking about?
Yeah, a couple of things actually stands out. So when the first order to shut down from the government, from the state, the governor, back in March, I think it was the 19th of March, and it came out basically effectively the next day. It's like, okay, you're going to be shut down unless you're considered an essential business. The first challenge was how to get 500 employees notified in a day, don't come into work the next day. Now we have a system in place, but quite honestly, we hadn't tested it in a while. And we realized we need to rethink about what is the best way to communicate to that many employees in that short amount of time. Hey, don't show up for work tomorrow. And we were able to figure our way through that, but it was a challenge. So we need to make sure we have a good system, that we test it regularly and be prepared, because we basically said, don't come in for today till we determine whether we can remain open, which we were able to. And we were back to work on that next Monday. So that was one of the key things. The other thing too, similar to what Scotty mentioned, our IT infrastructure and the ability to ramp up quickly. Most of our employees do have laptops if they work in the office environment, but again, they don't have the capability of doing some of the real engineering capable activities that a laptop just does allow them to do. So we need to have much more in place when it comes to the ability to work from home, but with more available from a desktop or whatever they need to do that. And the other thing we've learned is we're corporate headquarters in Cleveland. We're not corporately located out here in Southern California. So there was a lot of discussion, how far does this get driven at the corporate level to how much is done at the local level. And the decision was corporately, we're going to put some general guidelines and policies in place, but it was up to the local businesses to decide how we can actually implement this. So I think that was really actually a good stand to do that, because everywhere is different. And kind of to your point at the very beginning, when you have good cross-functional teams involved, you take the whole aspect, operations, sales, whether it's working in engineering, all those different functions, you pull everybody together. So what are the issues we're up against? And we very quickly were able to identify those and be able to get through those. We really haven't lost a beat, quite honestly, from a production standpoint. I think the biggest challenge we're going to have going forward is we can maintain things as they are, okay, no problem. It's how do you grow the business? How do you develop new products? How do you get that synergy together when you're remote to really start thinking about how do you build the business back up? Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge right now. How do we do that?
And I think that's a great point, right? So, I know just personally, for our organization, what we've learned through this is that, I am one that was, people said that they wanted to do an audio conference call. I would rather go to the dentist to go get my teeth pulled than deal with the joys of, basically a call where one person talks and everybody sits there and listens on a squawk box. But I think that what we've learned is that this technology, whether it's Zoom or Skype or Google Meetings or whatever, has real robust ability to create dialogue, but most importantly for folks that are working in lots of different locations, it is far better productive tool than to try and bring people together in a physical location, which, you know, attendance will fall off. And we've implemented a couple things which have been group meetings through Zoom that I think we will continue even once we get to a new normal, just because of how the ability to pull 18 people together that are working in lots of different places around North County. And the attendance level has been great, and I think we've learned that. But I think the second point that you're right on, which I know is something which, you know, I think everybody's trying to figure out. So much of our business development and new product development and what have you is from the synergies that go on with face-to-face meetings. And if we're looking for another extended period of time, how does that look and how does that sort of go? So we've got one question in chat, and Scotty, I'll ask you to start first. And it's in regards to both, I guess, you know, are you still doing it, but then also, how is this going? And that's on talent acquisition. So, you know, are you continuing to add talent or replace talent at Hunter? And how are you sort of doing that in this world of remote interviews and what have you?
Yeah, so we are still recruiting. The volume is much less than it typically would be in a normal situation. So we are, you know, doing a lot of first, second, and sometimes third round interviews, depending on how many folks need to be involved. Just like all of us are meeting here right now. And then we are still bringing candidates on site for final interviews. It's important for us from a cultural perspective for us to be able to connect with people. And that's really to determine fit, but it also allows for us to, especially if they're going to be working on, you know, the production floor or in the distribution centers, to really see how they respond to showing them that workspace. We have orientation going on today. We have 3 new people starting with us in San Marcos, 3 out in Orlando. Those classes are being facilitated in person, of course, physically distanced with masks and other PPE. So with that regard, it's business as usual. It's just reduced with regards to quantity.
Ray, over at Nordson, on the talent acquisition side?
Yeah, that's the same. We're very limited right now in our recruiting efforts. All the recruiting is done virtually. If there are positions that are working from home today, they will continue to do those interviews virtually. The challenge is onboarding people virtually, which we're also doing, which yeah, if you're not actually physically in the facility, that's difficult. So yeah, we're still continuing, but on a very select basis. Now, certainly if they're in production, similar, they're working to come in a facility, and we're still hiring production temporaries as we speak, and they're obviously going through the normal process of being on site. But yeah, regular full-time employment, very limited right now from a recruiting standpoint.
All right, so that was our chat question. Does any of you can either raise your hand or put a little, I'll go over to gallery view. You can use the hand raise thing. Anybody got a question for one of our speakers that they'd like to do?
I have a question.
Please, Steve, go ahead.
Hey, you guys, thanks for all the insight into what you've been doing. It's really good to hear firsthand how you're reacting to this thing, but I'm just curious from a sort of longer term project standpoint, are you hearing about budgets getting cut or projects getting pushed off or reprioritizing some of the operational projects that would normally have been looked upon right now going into the summer and into the fall?
Yeah, I'll start just from our perspective. So, you know, business is good. Customers are ordering, product is leaving the organization. And we're meeting goals. We do know that there will be a time where that's not the case. We don't know how much revenue loss that's going to be, and we don't know when it's going to happen. So we did take a pretty hard line look at both CapEx and OpEx and reducing, you know, any unnecessary spend just to protect the business so that we are in the best position possible after this is in the rearview mirror.
Right.
Yeah, I would say similarly in our case as well. We're doing very well. Our business is at the levels we expect it to be. It's interesting, you know, it's with Asia opening up kind of first, and a lot of our business is in Asia. and kind of almost back to normal, if not even more so. So that's on a good point. But yeah, we are also looking at some other longer term projects, saying we're just not sure what the long-term viability is, and we are being very, very careful on spending excess money, beyond what we know, what we can see in the future. For sure.
Any other questions? Steve, thank you for that. That was great. Any other questions for our speakers today? Well, I want to thank you guys. Those were my questions were the ones that you already asked, so I'm not going to come up with any new ones. And I really appreciate for both Scotty and Ray for you making yourselves available. Again, I think where we want to help and where we're committed to as an organization for San Diego North EDC is providing information over to North County businesses so that they can get up and running. And they can make the pivots that are going to be required as we lean into this normal for a while. It's not, let's hope it's not the new normal. I think we've learned lessons learned, but ready to get back to what we love about North County so much. So again, Ray, Scotty, thank you so much. Thanks for all the folks that are going to be attending. And again, I look forward to you for the next one of these that we do in the future. Again, thank you all for attending.
You're welcome. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
Eric. And if anybody wants to connect offline one-on-one, my office line is 760-304-7297. You can get me on email. It's scotty.lombardi@hunterindustries.com.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.